Search.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We're going to continue with our deep dives into certain skill position groups, and this one is kind of one I'm really excited about, a little bit more so than the others I've mentioned today, but also has its questions as well and concerns, most importantly. This is a running back room that really profiles as potentially optimistic one in terms of who they have, but it all come crashing down because this is a team that's really in a weird period of their kind of prospective histories. They're in a division that's really starting to catch up with the times, and if they want to be a part of the reckoning in this division, then they may have to rely on these running backs as well. And without further ado, that leads to the naming of this team in the Tennessee Titans and the two running backs they have here, starting off with the guy who they acquired and who is the one I have more questions about, Tony Pollard. And the reason why I have more questions about Tony Pollard than Tyjae Spears is this. We have seen Tony Pollard time and time again really start to be considered as one of those running backs you can rely upon, especially in fantasy. Last year, 6 TDs, 1,005 yards, but there's always this sense around him that there could be more to him than we already see. That's the question that a lot of pundits are asking about. Is he the running back that in 2022 was a Pro Bowler for the Cowboys, or is he the running back that last year saw kind of decline in important stats in terms of determining whether or not he can be a good fantasy player? And so that's where the bulk of the questions concerning who Tony Pollard is and how he profiles to his new team in the Tennessee Titans really falls. Because Tyjae Spears, as young as he is, only in his second year in the league, I think that upside with him and Levis really plays into that youth in the backfield, and also allows for Will Levis to really use and exploit positively the experienced receivers he has in Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins. So, out of all the running back acquisitions, outside of, say, the Derrick Henrys and Joe Mixons, this one is also one that gives me pause in terms of how this goes along the road for the Tennessee Titans, because when I look at the AFC South, they're really in a weird position in it, because they're not necessarily in an advantageous position because of them looking up at teams like the Texans and the Jaguars. But I don't necessarily think that acquiring Tony Pollard really helps them. In fact, I could go so far as to say it hinders the development of Tyjae Spears and kind of loses that young and youthful bond that Will Levis and Tyjae Spears was building in the backfield. So, I don't know what to make about all this Tony Pollard business. Let me know what you think in the comments, because I think that there is still a Pro Bowler caliber player within him, but I'm tentative to see how it translates to the Tennessee Titans, a team that looks like and seems like it wants to go forward. In terms of going forward, I think that Tyjae Spears was always going to be a guy who I really liked. And it kind of sucks to see this team kind of hinder that. Because if Tyjae Spears started, there would be questions about a second-year guy getting that much carries in this unit. But remember, he had almost 150 carries and touches in the Titans system last year. So I think he's ready to be thrown into the fire. I've spoken of his many and sung many of his praises on this show before, and I really think that he gives Will Levis a reliable, competent target that, most importantly, Will Levis himself feels comfortable with. Last year, 9th most targets amongst all running backs, more than 800 scrimmage yards, and if you're in a PPR league, of Superflex league, he could be worth taking a flyer on in the mid-rounds, maybe like a 5th or 6th round pick, and he can slot in immediately as your RB2 or as a flex player. I really think that I can't make much heads or tails about deciphering what's going to go on in the future in the long term for this Tennessee Titans room, but I know one thing. If they keep Tyjae Spears in-house for many years, I think that he will eventually become their starting running back. And it worries me to see that they don't necessarily see it. The organization doesn't necessarily see it enough that they bring in Tony Pollard for that level of competition. So it really is weird. And before we get to my prediction, I think that, if I were the general manager of the Tennessee Titans, I would be worried that I might have just made the wrong mistake here. Because think about it. Both Will Levis and Tyjae Spears still have a couple years left in their rookie deals. You don't necessarily have to worry about them. Investing money in a guy like Tony Pollard, who, while is quote-unquote proven in this league, has had a couple good seasons with the Dallas Cowboys. He is also getting up there in age, and he also doesn't feel like he's getting with the times. As Splash Bro says, Pollard and Spears definitely flex until they show us something in weeks 1 through 3. Yeah, that's exactly what I kind of feel, right? I still have more hope in Spears, like I said, but until I really know what this Titans offense is going to try to do, I'm not necessarily sure. And the reason why I'm also more unsure about the overall look at the Titans offense is their new offensive coordinator, Nick Holtz. Really hasn't made a name for himself enough to get as much of a prominent role as the Titans offensive coordinator. He spent many years in the league. He was a passing game coordinator for Jacksonville, so he knows a division at the very least. Spent some time with Oakland when they were the Oakland Raiders. Spent some time in college as well. But at the end of the day, I don't necessarily think the Tennessee Titans are in a place that really can use the potential of these running backs. I think that Tony Pollard will only decline more and more if there's no understanding of what this offense is. And Tyjae Spears' development might be halted a little bit. But my utmost prediction is this. And it could be that this prediction comes back in my face a couple of weeks down the road because Tyjae Spears isn't the fantasy sleeper who I really thought he was. I think that Spears will be the fantasy star even though Pollard's the starter. And the reason why I think this is, when I look at the Titans and what they could potentially be, I think that they're going to utilize Will Levis a lot more in this offense than people think. They're going to utilize Will Levis's one true trait, his arm strength, that's really exciting about him. And I think they're going to use his moxie to his advantage. Nick Holtz seems like a hire as the OC. From the very little I know about him, that's worked with wide receivers, very experienced in his knowledge of them, to my understanding. So he's really going to try and develop that aspect of the Titans game. When I look at Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears, I just think Tyjae Spears out of the backfield, knowing Will Levis after one season, will understand his tendencies, at least in the receiving game, a little bit more. As Splash Bro says, who would you flex this week? George Pickens or Tank Dell? And this is an interesting one because both of these games that these guys are playing, and this is what I look at in terms of who we would start week in, week out in terms of matchups. Both of these guys are playing in very under-the-radar games as the Steelers play the Falcons and the Texans are in the division against the Colts. So defense-wise, I'm looking at the Falcons and the Colts very similar. Very underrated defenses. The Falcons adding a little bit more juice with Matthew Judon coming into the system. Having A.J. Terrell as well. Their linebacker core looking like one of the deepest in the league. And then look at the Colts as well. They have a fantastic linebacker core as well. E.J. Speed, Sire Franklin. I really like the young depth they have in the secondary with a guy like Juju Brents as well. So it's really going to come down to the quarterbacks from the football. At the end of the day, C.J. Stroud is ultimately better than Russell Wilson. I don't know if Russell Wilson will look comfortable in his Steelers debut on the road against the Falcons, but I do know that C.J. Stroud will want to make a statement, especially against a division rival who really took them to the end last season in terms of the divisional race. So I think that CJ Stroud will be more hungry. He's going to come out swinging. So I like Tank Dell, even though he's not necessarily going to be a wide receiver 2 in this offense. As Tap to Learn also says, start London or Davante Adams. I actually think that Davante Adams, as cliche as it is to sound, in a game that could see a lot of running attempts as the Raiders face the Chargers, will be the X factor in that game. So I think you should start Davante Adams, but back to Splash Bro, I think Tell as well. So Dell for Splash Bro's comment, and Tap to Learn's comment Adams, because I actually think that he is the X factor here for that whole makeup of the game, because he is the receiver that will make the difference in that game. Because on the Chargers side, I don't see anyone making the difference. But back to the conclusion of my analysis of the Titans running back room. Yeah, the reason why I think Tyjae Spears has this star ability again, the rapport with Will Levis is very important. He knows his tendencies. And an offense with an offensive coordinator in Nick Holtz, who prides, at the very least, knowing some wide receivers, knowing their tendencies, I think he will get the most out of a receiving back rather than a guy like Tony Pollard. But Tony Pollard is just interesting in the volume of carries and targets he may get and touches in the system. It just needs to translate time in, time again, consistently over a period of time for me to really believe it. And I don't want to believe it because I think that Tyjae Spears was already good enough to be a starter on his own in the Tennessee Titans offensive scheme. But that will just about do it for this segment. Thank you guys yet again for all your comments as well. I appreciate them. But coming next, we actually transition from the NFL to college football, doing a little bit of a fantasy recap of some fantasy stars in college football over this past week. Week 1, we'll be right back to recap that.